Writing. The old man collapsed beside the highway just as the roar of motorcycles shook the afternoon air. Cars kept passing. Some slowed for a second, then drove on. A few drivers stared through their windshields, saw the leather vests and heavy bikes approaching, and chose not to stop. But one rider did. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can come from the most unexpected places, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to HeartLine Stories for more emotional stories that restore faith in humanity. The summer sun hung high above the interstate outside Flagstaff, Arizona, turning the asphalt into a shimmering river of heat. 78-year-old Harold Whitaker, a decorated Vietnam veteran, had spent the morning at the VA clinic. He carried a worn envelope containing his medical papers and a faded photograph of the platoon he had served with nearly 5 decades earlier. He had no children nearby, his wife had passed away 3 winters before, and most days the silence of his small apartment felt louder than any battlefield he had ever survived. When the city bus broke down several miles from his stop, Harold decided to walk the remaining distance. Pride had carried him through war, through injury, through grief, and it carried him onto the shoulder of that highway despite the punishing heat. Halfway there, his legs began to tremble. The dizziness came first, then the sharp pain in his chest, and finally the world tilted beneath him. He fell hard. The envelope scattered across the gravel shoulder. The old photograph drifted into the wind. In the distance came the unmistakable thunder of a motorcycle club. A black and chrome convoy appeared around the bend, dozens of riders moving in formation. People often crossed the street when they saw patches on leather jackets. Rumors followed clubs like shadows. To many passing motorists, the approaching riders looked dangerous. Ronan Vale was leading the group that day. At 46, he had spent years carrying a reputation he had stopped trying to explain. Tattoos covered his arms, a gray streak cut through his dark beard, and strangers usually judged him before he spoke a single word. What most people did not know was that Ronan had grown up with a Marine father who never returned from overseas. Respect for veterans had been stitched into him long before the leather vest ever was. The moment he saw the figure on the shoulder, he raised a gloved hand and brought the entire convoy to a halt. Heat waves rose from the pavement as Ronan jogged toward Harold. The old man was conscious but barely. His breathing was shallow, and one trembling hand was still reaching toward the photograph that had blown a few feet away. Ronan picked it up, saw the young soldiers frozen in black and white, and something in his expression changed. Within seconds, the bikers transformed from a roaring convoy into an organized rescue team. One rider called 911. Another retrieved water and a cooling towel. 2 others directed traffic away from the shoulder to keep Harold safe from passing trucks. Ronan knelt beside the veteran, shielding his face from the sun with his own body. Harold tried to speak, but exhaustion swallowed the words. Ronan simply held his hand and told him to stay awake. The ambulance took nearly 15 minutes to arrive. 15 minutes can feel like a lifetime when an elderly man is struggling to breathe. Ronan never left his side. When paramedics finally loaded Harold into the ambulance, they confirmed that he had suffered severe heat exhaustion complicated by an underlying heart condition. One medic later admitted that a few more minutes in that temperature could have been fatal. Most people assumed the story ended there. It did not. Ronan followed the ambulance to the hospital. He sat in the waiting room, still wearing his riding boots and road-dusted vest, while nurses and visitors glanced at him with the same caution he had seen his entire life. Hours passed. He could have left. He had every reason to continue his ride. Instead, he waited for a man he had met for only a few minutes. Late that afternoon, a nurse finally emerged and told him that Harold was stable. Ronan asked if the veteran had any family. The answer hit harder than expected. No one had come. No emergency contact was answering the phone. Harold had outlived many of his closest friends, and the few remaining relatives lived states away. The nurse mentioned, almost apologetically, that the old man had been asking whether the biker who found him was still there. Ronan was. When Harold was awake enough for visitors, he recognized the bearded rider immediately. The veteran's eyes filled with tears before either man managed to say much at all. Harold had spent years feeling invisible, and the last thing he expected was for a stranger, especially one the world might fear, to remain beside his hospital bed. Over the next several days, Ronan returned again and again. He brought fresh clothes from Harold's apartment after hospital staff provided access. He replaced the cracked reading glasses that had broken during the fall. He even framed the faded platoon photograph that had nearly blown away on the highway. Word of the unlikely friendship began to spread through the hospital. Nurses started stopping by Harold's room just to hear the two men talk. Ronan listened to stories of jungle patrols, lost friends, and the long difficult years that followed the war. Harold listened to stories of a rough childhood, mistakes that had earned judgment, and a life spent trying to prove he was more than the label on his back. Each man saw the other more clearly than most people ever had. Then came the discovery that changed everything. While helping sort through Harold's belongings, Ronan found a small wooden box tucked beneath a stack of old letters. Inside was a bronze star, several commendations, and a newspaper clipping describing an act of extraordinary bravery during the Vietnam War. Harold had pulled 2 wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. Ronan was stunned. The quiet, lonely man in the hospital bed was not just a veteran. He was a hero. Ronan brought the clipping to his motorcycle club that evening. The next morning, more than 60 riders arrived at the hospital. The parking lot filled with chrome, leather, and the deep rumble of engines. Hospital staff stepped outside in disbelief. One by one, the riders removed their helmets and formed a line through the entrance, each carrying a small American flag, a handwritten thank you note, or simply the intention to honor a man they had never met. Harold watched from his wheelchair near the lobby windows. At first he thought they were gathering for another event. Then he realized they were there for him. The hospital arranged a brief ceremony in the courtyard. Under the bright Arizona afternoon sun, Ronan stood beside Harold and read aloud the newspaper account of his wartime rescue. Many of the riders were veterans themselves. Others had lost parents, siblings, or friends in military service. As the words echoed across the courtyard, hardened men with weathered faces quietly wiped their eyes. When Ronan placed the framed platoon photograph into Harold's hands, the old veteran finally broke down completely. For years, he had believed the country had forgotten him. For years, he had eaten dinner alone, celebrated birthdays alone, and carried memories that seemed to matter to no one anymore. Now an entire courtyard stood in silence to honor his service. Just before the ending, we have one special request. Comment, heroes are everywhere, if you believe compassion matters more than appearances. A local reporter captured the ceremony, and the story spread quickly through the community. Donations began arriving for Harold's medical expenses. Volunteers offered transportation to future appointments. A nearby retirement community invited him to speak at their Veterans Day event. The man who had nearly died unnoticed on the side of a highway suddenly found himself surrounded by people who cared. But the moment that brought everyone to tears happened after the cameras were gone. As the riders prepared to leave, Harold asked Ronan for one final favor. He wanted to hear the motorcycles. Ronan helped him stand near the curb, steadying him carefully as the afternoon light turned golden. One by one, the riders started their engines. The sound rolled through the hospital grounds like distant thunder, powerful yet strangely comforting. Harold closed his eyes. He later admitted that it reminded him of the helicopters that had once carried wounded soldiers to safety. Except this time, he was the one being carried. Ronan removed a small patch from the inside of his vest and pressed it into Harold's palm. It was not an official club patch, just a simple piece of cloth embroidered with the words, "Never ride alone." Harold held it against his chest. If this story touched your heart, Please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists, leave a comment for our veterans, and subscribe to HeartLine Stories. That evening, as the last motorcycle disappeared down the road, Harold stood a little taller than he had in years. A man the world had feared had become the man who saved him. And a veteran who thought he had been forgotten discovered that honor, gratitude, and human connection can arrive from the most unexpected direction. Sometimes angels do not wear white. Sometimes they arrive in broad daylight, on a roaring motorcycle, and stop when everyone else keeps driving.